Hello class, this is a video tutorial on the properties of functions, the domain and range. The natural domain of f of x is the set of all x where f of x is defined. The natural range of f of x is the set of all y where f of x is, again, defined. F of x is defined where a real solution is resulted from f of x. That's a lot to understand. I'm going to show you, so we can get our understanding, this idea of defined by showing you what is undefined. Okay, so here are some examples of undefined points in any function f of x. Let's consider this function. Now, let's take a look at the denominator. If we let x equal 2, so let's this be 2, it will be 2 minus 2 equaling 0. But then, if we have that, we have the function being 4 over 0. What is a number divided by 0? Well, that's our first idea of an undefined point. So in this example, x equaling 2 is undefined. Okay, that means every other number here will give us a defined point. So in this case, x cannot equal 2. Let's take a look at another example. Square root of x. So if we take, for example, the square root of 9, that'll give us, well, that's 3 times 3, or negative 3 times 3. Okay, that's very straightforward. However, what if we have the square root of negative 1? What two of the same number will give me negative 1? If I take positive 1 times positive 1, that's not right, because that's positive 1. I want negative 1. If I take negative 1 times negative 1, that's also positive 1. Okay? So the square root of a negative number is another example of an undefined point. So in this case, x cannot be less than 0. Okay, which means x, another way I can say it, x must be greater than or equal to 0. That's another idea of undefined points. Okay, let's take a look here. I want you to consider if I put f of 3. Well, according to this function, we will use this component because 3 is greater than 2. So therefore, we will use this one. It will be 2 substitute 3. That is 6. If I pick the point now, let's pick the point negative 4. Well, according to this function, we will use this component. So it would be negative half times 4. Giving us negative 2. Oh, sorry, positive 2. But now, I want you to consider if I have f of 1. Which part of the component are we going to use? Well, according to this particular function, there is no definition of f of 1. So in this example, x equaling 1 is undefined. In actual fact, any number between, if you look at any number less than 2 but greater than 0, okay, because everything from 2 and above is defined, and everything less than 0 is also defined. So that means it's undefined between x is less than 2 but greater than or equal to 0. So between these 2 points, we don't know what the solution is. So it is undefined between these 2 points. Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea of defined points, because now we're going to look at this idea of the domain and range. Let's take a look in this one. With questions such as these, when you're doing it for the first time, highly advise going online and looking for a graphing calculator. So you can type in these functions and it'll show you what they will look like. So let's get into this first function here. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the domain. The domain refers to x values. So what x values here give me a defined point? Well, can you think of any x values that give me an undefined point? For example, if I put 1, so f of 1, if I substitute that into my function, it will make it, or it'll map it up onto this point. So f of 1 gets pushed up to here. So that is defined. If I pick, let's say, f of positive 100 all the way up here, wherever it is, that's also defined. So f of 100 equals 302. That's also defined. So realistically, every x value here is defined. So our domain then, since everything is defined, our domain is all real x values. Okay, so that is the domain. We look at the x values, and let's write this in bracket notation. This is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Okay, let's take a look at now the range. If the domain are x values, the range refers to the y values. Let's take a look. Are there any y values along this line that aren't defined? Are there any points on this line that are broken or missing? Obviously, anything beyond that is not shown, but the line continues on to infinity upwards and to infinity downwards. If you caught what I said, well, really, there's no restrictions on the y values. There's nothing that the y cannot reach. So in this case, the range is all real y, which means in bracket notation, that's also from negative infinity to positive infinity. That's the range for that's the domain and range for this particular function. Let's take a look at another function as a point of contrast. Okay, let's look at the domain. Are there any x values that are undefined in this function? Are there any functions that are not allowed? Well, I can't think of any. If I pick 5, f of 5 becomes 25, that's allowed. If I pick f of 25 all the way up over there somewhere, that's also allowed. So realistically, there's nothing that's restricting me in my domain. When there's no restrictions, our domain is now, well, it will be all real x. And in bracket notation, negative infinity to positive infinity. Let's take a look at our range. Now, let's take a look at the y values. Obviously, this function along the top and along the top here, they continue to infinity upwards. So the highest point of this function is infinity. But now I want you to consider the lowest point that this function can reach. What is the lowest y value that this function can reach? Can this function, let's say, reach -1? Well, according to this graph, it stops at this point right here. So in this case, our range is restricted to 0 and above. So in this case, our range is y is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, because that's the lowest point it can go, but it can reach positive infinity. So in bracket notation, we can write this as from 0 with a square bracket to positive infinity, open bracket. Okay, so that's just two examples of the domain and range. I'll see you in the next video regarding this, so we can see two more examples on the domain and range. Hope to see you in the next video. Best of luck.